call the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Board of Directors, regularly scheduled meeting for Thursday, September 9th, Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould?
Here.
Orzali is absent. Director Wood?
Here.
Sheets? Here. Director Jones is also absent. Director White?
Here.
Clark? I see him connecting. Director Clark?
Yes.
You're present? Perfect.
Yes, present.
Sailors?
Here.
And Kelly?
Present.
Perfect.
Thank you. Next would be the pledge to the flag. If everybody could repeat after Director Wood.
Pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all. All right, the Metro Cable announcement. The open session meeting is videotaped for cablecast on Metro Cable 14. Replay on Monday, September 13th at 6 p.m. and Wednesday, September 15th at 6 p.m. on channel 14 webcast at metro14live.saccounty.net. If you take note that the Metro Cable has a new webcast address, as was previously mentioned. All right then, public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within district jurisdiction, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any speakers?
Nobody contacted me ahead of time, but Art, if you could please unmute the attendees.
The attendees, you now have the ability to unmute yourselves if there's anything you'd like to present to the board at this time. No response.
Appears that we have no speakers. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. What's your pleasure with the consent agenda?
I'll second.
Motion by Director Sheets, second by Director Sailors. Are there any questions on the consent calendar?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Please proceed, Director Gould.
Thank you. Just quickly, as we purchase these Type 1 engines and the new ladder truck, I'm wondering if the expert in the room can give us any idea for the public's edification of the total number of dollars approximately that we save when we purchase these pieces of equipment in these large collectives. I just think it's important that the public understand that when we do these kinds of purchase programs with our fellow public agencies, we save the taxpayer a lot of money. And I think as we go about this evening purchasing some pretty expensive equipment, that we at least hear some general idea of what kind of money our organization may be saving versus purchasing it one-off by ourselves.
Thank you, Director Gould.
So I'll take that, Director Gould. Depending on the purchase, because those can range anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 items all the way up to multi-million-dollar things.
Right.
Again, anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 per unit on a smaller rig, up to well over $100,000 for the big aerials. It ranges, changes every year. I don't have an exact number, but it is significant.
Sure. And I think that's all I was looking for, is to just continue to remind the public that constantly our staff are looking for opportunities to save money, because as you can imagine, someone seeing what the ladder truck is costing us, they may think that we're going out there and just purchasing willy-nilly the Cadillac, as it were. But when we do these kinds of things, you all work very hard at ensuring that we're finding the very best price for the appropriate equipment that we can. And so I just wanted to reinforce that idea for the public. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, sir, for answering.
Certainly. Any other further questions on the consent calendar? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets. Aye. White,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Sailors. Aye. And Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Moving on to our final 2021-22 fiscal year final budget. Mr. Campo.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly and members of the board. We're here to present the final budget for fiscal year 21-22. Before I kick that off, I'd just like to mention that we did review this final budget with the Audit and Finance Committee on August 26th. And Chief Harms, I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to make before we kick it off.
Go right into it.
Okay.
Keep right on moving.
So we did adopt the
Oh, shoot.
hopefully that wasn't
That wasn't directed to you and me.
just as a reminder, the board did adopt the preliminary budget June 10, 2021. As a reminder, that budget was essentially balanced with expenditures and transfers out equal to revenues transfers in. So the final budget has some additional changes. Number one is the higher estimated property tax revenue. So property tax revenue, we've increased about $1.9 million. It was based on a higher assessed valuation that we received from the county in early July. So that assessed value information indicated the increase would be the preliminary budget projected an increase of about 4% in property tax revenue. And based on the higher assessed value amounts, it looks like it's about 5.1%, 5.2%. So more in line with where it was last year. So that generated some additional property tax revenue. Overall, revenue is up about 2.3 million. So there's some additional items that we'll talk about later. On the spending side, we increased the budget about $488,000 for a couple of items that we'll discuss when we get to the expenditure slide. So with the estimated beginning balance of about $34 million, the projected reserve at the end of next year is going to be about $36 million, which is around 15.2%. So within the range that the board is looking for in terms of the annual reserve. It's kind of hard to see, but this is just a comparison on the general fund budget. So across the top are revenues. There we go. So you can see on the revenues it's at about $240 million there, an increase of about $2.1 million. That's primarily the property tax revenue. Some smaller increases in service charges, and I mentioned 2.3 million overall. You'll see down toward the bottom transfers in. We're projecting about a $200,000 increase in the transfers in. So those two amounts, 2.3 million increase in revenues for the year. The second line is labor costs. You can see at roughly 204 million. That's down about 246,000 from preliminary. And that's as we discussed, I think in one of our closed sessions, we've got the final premium increases for the CalPERS health plan, and we plug those numbers in, and it actually resulted in a slight decrease in labor costs. Supplies and services about 263,000.
I can clear this up for you real quick.
Yeah, it did look a little fuzzy. Yeah, that's clear now. Not much bigger, but pretty sharp. So overall expenditures, about 375,000 increase. You'll see taxes, license, debt service, and others, 355,000 increase from preliminary, primarily related to GEMT and QUAF expenses. We'll talk about those. I mentioned 488,000 increase in spending from prelim. So if you look down below, there's a $100,000 increase in transfers out. So those two combined to the overall 488,000 increase. There we go. So we have about a $1.7 million improvement. When you look at revenues less expenses. And then overall transfers net increase of about $100,000. That $216,000 for the general fund transfers in is related to the refinancing of the lease revenue bonds and part of the savings and debt service that's allocated between general fund and the lease properties fund. So bottom line, preliminary budget again was at roughly break even. We were positive about 278,000. We're now looking at about closer to 2.1 million. So about a $1.8 million improvement in overall fund balance. This is a slide the board is familiar with. Just taking a look at overall revenues over time. As the chief pointed out, we're making this presentation to the Audit and Finance Committee. One more year and we lose that dip at the very front, and then it's all positive going up. You can see that rather positive increase in property tax revenues starting about 2013. And also the widening gap between other revenues and property taxes is the district's been more aggressive in terms of medic cost recovery, GEMT, QUAP, all of those elements are in that other revenue category. You can see how that's grown over time. This is just a different way of looking at overall revenues and other funding sources. Overall, about $250 million. The bulk of that being, of course, the property tax revenue at about 70%. And then charges for services at 23%. That's primarily the medic cost recovery. And then intergovernmental operating transfers and other revenue sources. So again, not a whole lot of change here other than really the property tax revenues. And this is just kind of a recap. Property taxes and intergovernmental revenues are up about $7.5 million compared to last fiscal year. Charges for services at $5.3 million. These are items we covered in the preliminary budget. Again, very important. Net IGT, the revenue is at $9.4 million. That's assuming the same level of activities as the current year. All told, $250 million in general fund revenues and financing sources. This is the same kind of pie chart for district spending. Overall, about $248 million. So we have the $2 million surplus or positive spread between revenues and spending. And of course, labor costs being the largest component at 82%. And then services and supplies at 33 million, representing another 13%. And then we have the operating transfers out, primarily transfers to the capital outlay fund to fund capital expenditures. And then taxes, licenses, and debt service. We'll take a look at some of the components of those items. So the $204 million labor budget, that's up about $5 million over the current year. Some of the major changes, or excuse me, previous year, some of the major changes is that we're budgeting for all positions being filled. So that increased that labor budget about $5 million. We have about $6 million in increases in pension costs, OPEB, medical contributions. Again, partly because we're assuming all those positions are going to be filled. And if all those positions are filled, then we don't need as much overtime. So we dropped that overtime budget by about $6 million. Now, if we get to mid-year and we're not able to fill those positions, then we'll transfer some of those monies down from salaries and benefits back into overtime. I mentioned services and supplies at $33 million. This is it represents an increase of about $4.5 million over last fiscal year. As the board's well aware, $1.5 million of that is for your property and liability insurance. $600,000 increase in the contribution to the Sacramento Regional Fire and Emergency Communication Center. It's the district's additional contribution. $400,000 in safety clothing and supplies related to firefighter academies, and about $300,000 related to GEMT and Guam. So quality assurance. So this is that other category of debt service, assessments, and contributions. About $1.9 million of that $4.7 million is the annual payment to Sacramento County for property tax administration. All agencies receiving property tax have to contribute toward the cost of the property tax administration program. $2.2 million assessment to the state for GEMT. The bulk of that gets reimbursed from other agencies. So the district is fronting that money for the GEMT program administered by the state, and then the district bills the other participating agencies to recover those amounts. And then again, the reduced debt service payments for the lease revenue bond refinancing. And that's split roughly 50-50 between the general fund and the lease properties fund. Finally, transfers out is $6 million to the capital facilities funds for some of the items that you saw earlier, and we'll take a look at that on the next slide. But that's about $500,000 less than we did last year as a transfer. So in the capital facilities fund, we have proposed capital expenditures of $9 million. So the board approved a big chunk of that this evening on your consent calendar. But that budget includes 3 Type 1 engines, 2 Type 3 engines, the truck, and 3 Type 5 engines, and a water tanker. Some of the major purchases planned for this year. The grants fund, there's about $2 million in expenditures for several open grants. And you'll be receiving the funds, or have received the grant funds for those expenditures. And it's also including a $33,000 grant that's on the agenda. It's upcoming after this. Lease properties fund is balanced with about $1.1 million in lease revenue and about $1.1 million in expenditures to maintain those lease properties. And lastly, the development impact fee fund. About $1.3 million projected revenues of development fees to be collected, and $5.1 million budgeted. It's a little hard to see at the bottom. $5.1 million budgeted for the construction of Station 68. It's now open.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Almost.
Almost. And that's my brief presentation on the pretty much the difference between the preliminary budget and the final budget. We have to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Campo.
Yes, sir.
Do any directors have questions of Mr. Campo on the preliminary, the fiscal year final budget, excuse me. Seeing no questions, All right. I think we've all been around long enough to understand that each of these need to be taken separately. So please don't be shy. What's your pleasure with A?
Chair, I make a motion that we adopt a resolution 2021-22 final budget for the general operating fund 212A.
Second.
Thank you. We've got a motion by Director Sheets and second by Director Clark. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Pierce, and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Pleasure with item B,
Chair,
1B.
I like what is it? Staff's recommendation for resolution 2021-22 final budget for capital facilities fund 212. I'll second it.
We have a motion by Director Sheets and a second by Director Sailors. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, action 1C.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adopt staff's recommendation for resolutions 2021-22 final budget for the grants fund 212G. I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Sheets. We have a motion by Director Sheets and a second by Director Sailors. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
What is your pleasure with action item 1D?
Motion for resolution 21-22 final budget for the development impact fees fund 212I. I second it.
We have a motion by Director Sailors and a second by a motion by Director Sheets and a second by Director Sailors. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Passes.
Item 1E.
Make a motion that we adopt staff's recommendation for the resolution 2021-22 final budget for the leased properties fund 212L. I second it.
Once again, we have a motion by Director Sheets and a second by Director Sailors. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 1F. What is your pleasure?
Sorry, make a motion to adopt staff's recommendation for resolution 2021-22 final budget for the IGT fund 212M. I second it.
We have a motion by Director Sheets and a second by Director Sailors. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Passes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Moving on to action item 2, the fiscal year 2020 State Homeland Security Grant Program Award Acceptance. Ms. Castleberry.
Good evening, directors here and there. Pleased to be here tonight to request the board's acceptance of a fiscal year 20 State Homeland Security Grant Award in the amount of $33,723 for a project to install enhanced controlled access systems at several of our fire stations. Earlier this year, we submitted 3 applications for Shish Gap. The total was about $440,000. One was an application for $370,000 for the access control program. Another was about $70,000. That was for a hazmat trace detection analyzer. And finally, the third application was about $26,000, and that was for a supply and equipment cache for the Sacramento Regional Incident Management Team. The SRIMT application was not awarded. The hazmat trace detection analyzer was not funded through SHISHTAP. However, it was subsequently submitted through UASI for grant funding, and it was approved, and we have received that equipment. And finally, the application for the access control was partially funded in a scale down project based on the amount of funds that SHISHTAP had available. So we will be hopefully moving forward with that pending more acceptance. Of note, we also submitted an application on behalf of the Sacramento Regional Fire and EMS Communications Center that totaled around $550,000. And that was for a CAD software enhancement live move up module. So basically my understanding is it helps real-time analysis of figuring out where move ups should happen with artificial intelligence versus relying on the dispatcher to do that. So it should increase efficiency for the whole comm center. So that actually was funded. That's going to be a grant between the comm center and SAC OES, but we will be assisting with the management of that grant. So if you don't have any questions, I would ask that you approve the grant award.
Are there any questions of Ms. Castleberry? What's your pleasure with the item?
Mr. Chairman, I move the adoption of grant acceptance resolution for the approved fire station controlled access system project.
Second.
We've got a motion by Director Clark. Somebody seconded. Thank you, Director Sheets. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Taylor,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, excellent. Moving on to our public hearing. Item number 1 on public hearing is division redistricting. Chris Chaffee, are you available?
So I'm going to kick us off, President Kelly.
Okay, thank you.
I'll quickly turn it over to Chris. But what I want to do is just quickly set the stage for the hearing and give a little background on this issue. Our Enabling Act, the Fire Protection District 1987, requires fire districts to consider redistricting by November 1st following the year of the census. So previously, in the past efforts, Metro Fire has worked with county staff and our CAD technicians accomplished this, but a number of challenges have presented themselves at time around. And I'll just quickly go through those. First of all, the census data was delayed due to COVID. Typically, we would have that information months beforehand. I think the data has been available for just a couple of weeks, if I'm correct. So really putting a strain on the time to get this process done. There have been some changes to the law regarding the requirements, making this analysis much more sophisticated. And then finally, there's been a recent significant lawsuit, a number of law changes that don't necessarily apply to us as a special district, but they have established some best practices to consider law redistricting. So because of all those factors, we asked for a subject matter expert, and we retained redistricting partners to guide us through this process. And we've asked them to do two things. First, to look at the initial analysis with the brand new census data, and then provide their initial thoughts and findings today for the board for consideration. And then secondly, if the recommendation is to move forward with new district boundaries, to guide us through that process. So with that, with the remainder of the hearing here, I'm going to invite Chris Chaffee up from Redistrict Partners to go through his findings. And then we'll turn it back over to President Kelly to take those questions and comments from the public regarding this issue. Then we'd like to hear from the board, any questions and comments. And finally, Council Wabra is going to address a couple items for the good of the board. So with that, I will turn it over.
Mr. Fry, did the chief have anything to say? Chief, you good?
Jeff Fry and Michelle Mahoney have done a tremendous job getting point A to here today and the plan for being able to move forward. I support the plan, and with the timelines that we have, I think everything is lining up perfectly right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right.
Good evening. Thank you for having me today. And sorry, I'm getting used to speaking in public once again, mostly on Zoom. My name is Chris Chafee. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Redistricting Partners. We're a local redistricting firm, mostly based in Sacramento, but we work all over the state and the nation, actually, doing redistricting work with agencies from working with states. We just got the contract to work to redistrict the state of New York through their commission process. And we work with fire districts and water districts and cities and counties all over the state. So thank you again for having me here today. And I just want to go through like the introduction. First off, your current district lines, looking at the current population numbers, what the total deviations are of them, then going into kind of what redistricting is really quickly, traditional redistricting principles, and then just a little bit of talk about census data. So this is your current map. I think you probably can see it better with your printouts in front of you. There are 9 districts. I think the biggest thing in the redistricting process, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is the #1 criteria is rebalancing district lines based on the census. And so you can see, there's a clicker. I don't think the pointer is going to work, but you can look at the deviations on the right-hand column where it says 2020 census population and deviations. The underlying case law and principle is that local districts are allowed around a 10% deviation, total deviation from your largest district to your smallest. So you can see that your total deviation with your current lines are 24.3%, well above that total of 10. So that's why I think we're here today, is because we really want to look at your current lines, talk through them with you and the public to get input on how we're going to shift these current lines to bring your back into total of 10% deviation. So what is redistricting? I think everyone's heard about it from a legislative standpoint, where we balance things for Congress and the legislature, but it affects any agency like yours that is already in district lines. And really, the #1 criteria, like I said, is rebalancing them so that there is equal population amongst districts, so that we allow for equal representation and the idea of one person, one vote. And there really are 5 traditional criteria that we look to. Again, relatively equal size, which I can go through because we've gone through it already. But the second one is contiguous. Your districts are contiguous. You can draw a border with one pen stroke. Everything touches. There's no islands. That's all we're really looking for on whether they're contiguous. The third, traditional redistricting principle, and something that really will guide this process, is the ideas of communities of interest. Now, there are many communities of interest out there. These are just a handful: senior citizens, students, like preserving a downtown core, drawing all the rural areas into one district, preserving homeowners or renter areas. But I think for your redistricting, we're really going to look to local government lines. I think a lot of your districts currently are based on cities and census designated places, and rural versus urban cores. So I think that's really we're going to look to. This is the 4th traditional criteria, and something that most fire districts, water districts, and other service-based districts really look to is who they serve, their cities. And then one thing, as mentioned prior, and a change in current law, is the Fair Maps Act. Now, it doesn't apply to special districts. It only applies to cities and counties. But it's really brought this idea forward, is to not split neighborhoods or cities if possible. So that's one of the things that's I think going to guide our actions throughout this process. Now, the final traditional criteria is compactness. And your district lines mostly are pretty compact now, but it's really the idea of not having funny shapes as some states dictate, or measuring the circumference. But in California, it's really a simple idea, not bypassing nearby populated areas in favor of more distant populated areas. So drawing squares and circles as much as possible. But as many of you probably already know, cities do not have really nice edges, right? They're not really nicely shaped. There's jagged edges and everything else. But when we can, making sure that we draw areas together that make sense. The other additional redistricting rules that have been introduced by the Fair Maps Act is not considering candidates or incumbents as communities of interest, and not drawing district lines to favor a political party. And then this is where I think the discussion, I hope today can go, is talking through additional items, additional criteria that the board or the public think we should look to as we draw district lines. A couple elements out there that cities and counties and special districts have used is using future growth. So looking at where we expect growth to be and underpopulating those areas and overpopulating areas where they've been built out. Balancing rural and the urban interface. We did a fire district in Novato, and one of the things was they wanted to have their WUI in at least 3 of the 5 districts, so that each 3 board members had that as like a basis for their thought process for the fire district. I thought that was a really interesting decision, but those are the kind of things I know that fire districts and water districts look to. And then I know it came up on our initial call, also looking at where fire stations are and making sure that districts have like a balance of fire districts as much as possible. And there are other additional criteria that we can use. And that's really what this first hearing is about, is to talk kind of through the map and have you guys talk about where you think certain districts could shrink, get smaller because they're overpopulated, or expand if they haven't had the growth over the last decade. And just going through our timeline. So of course, tonight is the first introduction. The idea is to come back in October to your next meeting and introduce a set of draft plans, at least 3, that rebalance the lines, use the criteria that we discussed tonight and your insights and the public's insights to guide our redraft. Present those draft plans to you, and then go through them and have you guys comment. You like plan A, you don't like plan B, make shifts in district lines in October, and then come back in November with another set of lines that are aligned to your comments, and then finish up with a final plan in December. And I think that's it. I was going to put up, I think I have the district lines at the end. So that's my formal presentation, but now I'm open for questions. I'm also open for public comment and any discussion.
Are there any questions of board members for Mr. Chappie? No questions, discussion? Would anybody like to see the slide that showed the difference in the districts, the numeric differences?
Yeah, I was
Director Gould?
We'll just go back to that, sorry.
maybe you could just talk just a little bit about the population deviation.
Sure.
And on each one of those, because that helps.
Thank you.
Understand that.
Yeah.
What are those big areas, little areas, and changes that may have to happen?
So I think the biggest changes in your map, if you look at the highlights of District 6 and District 9. So District 6 is your most western district, kind of up against Sacramento. That has had the largest growth over the decade. It's over deviated. Its total deviation now is, its deviation now is 10%. And 9, which is the Elk Grove rural, I guess it's not really Elk Grove, but it's the part attached to Elk Grove, and the unincorporated county portion, that has not kept pace with the rest of the districts, and that's really underpopulated. So those two districts are really causing that 24 total population deviation. The other districts are also like District 7, again, is right next to 6, and more of the urban core. You've also seen a lot of population growth there. So I think talking through shrinking District 6 and 7 geographically, expanding District 5 and District 9, those are the two kind of, I think, points of most points of interest. I think another thing that was also talked about was trying to create or keep the current configuration where you have 6 districts above the river and 3 districts below the river. So if you think of these, the 6 districts and the 3 districts as like separate ecosystems, shifting, you would probably take population from 4 into 9. And then in the northern parts, you would swap between 5, 6, and 7. You'd basically probably move 7 over into 6 and then move 5 more into 7. You could also maybe cut off the tops of 6 and 7. That makes sense from a fire perspective.
Just one-on-one, we talked about District 4, that there's a lot of new growth that is coming, but a lot of it is going to be out a ways before that, and
Right.
You've had some thoughts on that too.
So I think with growth, it's important to make it as a 6th or 7th criteria, because we don't necessarily know when it's going to happen. But I think it's good to align it. I know if District 4 is going to grow a lot and it's already overpopulated, then maybe we should shrink it even more. It should be underpopulated to start the decade. If we assume that the most growth, the fastest, is going to grow in that kind of eastern part of 4, then that would just mean that maybe 9 extends all the way to your western border, and 4 just becomes a lot more compact, just kind of above 9. And I think if you did those swaps with 4 and 9, I think you probably would have a much more balanced southern 3 districts, because 8, the one that's all over, that includes Rancho, is almost perfect from a population standpoint. If there's a line in here that you think needs to change, that would be no big deal. But the current kind of boundaries of 8 work from a population standpoint.
Not to interrupt you, but maybe now that we've looked at that slide, if we could look at the one that you put up earlier of the district boundaries. Excellent, thank you.
And then just can you talk a little bit how we talked about laying the fire stations over it?
Yeah, so one of the things we'll do is you've already given us the shape files with the fire stations points. So we're going to plot them on this map. And then any maps we present to you in October, we'll have them plotted so you can see what the shifts have done with the underlying fire station locations. We can update the memo, or really the map, and with the fire stations placement so you know where they are now. By district, you probably already do, but sometimes looking at it on a map makes it easier.
All right.
Any questions or comments by directors? Seeing none? Okay. Do you have anything to wrap up with, Mr. Jaffe?
No, we'll be giving you new maps with the fire stations next week, and look forward to presenting in October with some draft plans that you guys can dissect and tell me what I did wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that was a presentation item. Mr. Lavra, have you got anything to
Yeah,
add?
a few things I would add. We should first probably clarify for the record that there's no public speakers here today that wish to ask questions or provide any input, nor do we have anybody now on the line from the public that would want to make any comment. So if we could do that first.
Art, if you can unmute, please, and just see if there's anybody who would like to speak. I was not contacted ahead of time by anybody.
Attendees, you have the ability to unmute yourselves if there's anything you would like to add at this time.
Appears that no one desires to speak.
All right. The next thing is, just to bring to the board's attention, was that last time the district went through a redistricting analysis 10 years ago, the board created and selected an ad hoc committee of, I believe, 3 board members that worked with staff and worked with the consultants and others to review some of this information and to provide advice moving forward to the whole board. We still are on a, even though we have time, as we sit now, we're on a pretty, I would say, tight schedule, considering we have one more board meeting in September, 2 in October, and the redistricting has to be approved final by November 1. So we have time, but not a ton of time. That if the boards wanted to consider appointing an ad hoc committee, I believe there's grounds for the board to take up that item as an action item tonight, even though it's not on the agenda. The rules for doing that are that there has to be an immediate need to take that action, and I would conclude under the authorities that there is an immediate need due to the fact that this data would normally have been submitted by the federal government in March 21st of 2021. It wasn't issued until August 21st, 2021, so 5 months delay on that. I don't know exactly when the district had their hands on that information, but it's been relatively recently. So we're up against that time restriction. Moreover, I know that myself and Chief Harms and Jeff Fry and Michelle met with Mr. Chaffee on Tuesday, which was after the agenda was posted. And he went through some of the numbers and went through the deviations and went through the maps and concluded that based on the data that he had before him at that time, although not 100% complete with what he wanted to do, that he anticipated that there would be a recommendation from his point of view that some lines be redrawn as part of the redistricting. So I feel comfortable in saying that the agency staff did not know until after the agenda was posted that there was this need to redraw the lines and do the redistricting. So if that's something that the board wanted to consider doing this time around, I just bring that to the board's attention if they want to consider that. If they do, board member will have to make a motion and second it to here's the matter, even though it's not posted on the agenda, then there'd have to be a 2/3 vote to approve that, which would be 5 votes here tonight. So that's all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to bring that.
Thank you. So board members, as John indicated, I think it's important that we have an opportunity to discuss this matter further and possibly make a motion to assemble an ad hoc committee. So with that, I would accept a motion to add this item to the agenda and give us the opportunity to have this discussion. And I would appreciate if somebody would make that motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we take a vote on an ad hoc committee for purposes of the redistricting as Walrus discussed.
It would actually be a motion. Hear that.
I'll make a motion to hear the motion.
Thank you. Because then you're going to have to do another motion if that's motion is seconded and approved.
I'd second that motion.
All right, we had a motion by Director Woods. I heard a second by Director Sheets. Thank you. And Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Sailors,
Aye.
and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. I've given this a little bit of thought, and I, excuse me. My initial thought, and I'm open to suggestions otherwise, but I looked at our district and I saw Director Sailors in the very north. I saw Director Orzali in the east, and I saw Director Jones in the south and the east. And I thought that the three of them as an ad hoc committee to work on this would be good. And the advantage of just having the three is they wouldn't be subject to Brown Act. We wouldn't have to notice the meetings and so forth. So I think that's a good number. Anybody else have any thoughts on it? No? Then I would accept a motion to appoint an ad hoc committee as I just described.
Chair, I make a motion to.
I would second that.
All right, Director Sailors with the motion, Director Clark with the second. The motion was to form an ad hoc committee with Directors Sailors, Director Orzali, who I had, anyways, Director Orzali and Director Jones. Motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Gould,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Aye.
Sailors, and Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right then. Thank you for working that in. And the ad hoc committee will be formed. And Madam Clerk, will you make sure that you reach out and notify the ad hoc committee of their appointment?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. On to reports. President's report, I have nothing to add. Fire Chief?
Good evening, directors. Just a number of things here. First off, I would like to thank Ken Campbell. Ken, where did he go? He's gone. Okay, I still like to thank him. The opportunity to sit down and knowing Ken beforehand, but coming in with Amanda leaving and working through the budget, everything has just been tremendous. And then I know him and Dave have been working a lot, getting ready for the next transition. So tonight's presentation was his last presentation, and it has us set up and moving forward, and it has really been good. We are going to keep Ken on contract for a little while just because of his expertise, really just across the state and with fire districts. So thanks very much on that. Erin Castleman, Erin, oh, she's still here too. Thank you, Erin. As you can see, once again, she's done just an outstanding job with grants and working to get those put together. She said it very nicely, but we really tasked her with almost over $500,000, over $500,000 grant for the dispatch center. All the fire departments worked together for it, but it was really Erin's expertise for being able to put it all down, being able to do that. And really, if you think about it, what it does is it looks at where all our apparatus is, and then tells the system where they should be in very predictable 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So once again, Erin, thank you, and continuing on with putting those things together. Jeff Fry and Michelle Dahoney, thank you both for what we just saw here, which was a great presentation and start for redistricting. I have learned more in the last few weeks about that, and I think we all have, of being able to go through. So it seemed very seamless, but the amount of work that both of them put in for being able to really very late getting the census data, but being able to sit down and do that and move forward, I think is just is really good, and I'd like to thank them. Also, as far as the other one, and Chief Mitchell will talk more about, is just our crews out there. He'll talk about some of the incidents that we've had in the region and their responses and being able to get out there. So thanks to that group too. I want to congratulate Captain Joe Schmidt for his being selected for the EMS Day Captain assignment. He started here on the 7th, and so it's great to see Joe that he volunteered / assigned to his position, but he is here with us, and he's doing a great job already. We also had a number of people that Parker went through as the PIO and picked for backup. Relief, I shouldn't say backup, but relief PIO. So Captain Mark Nunez, Captain Jordan Oakes, Supervising Inspector Diane Schmidt, Engineer Bo Lafette, and then Engineer Eric Satch. So they will be part of the team then for the relief on the PIO. I think that is great too. Congratulations to Fire Mechanic Phil Morrell. He left the district on 9/1 after 28 years as a mechanic. So congratulate to him too. Just a lot of meetings and a lot of activity kind of across the district between COVID, response, staffing, everything else that you can imagine. But yesterday we had a meeting, and it really was guided on wall time. And one of the things that is absolutely crushing us in the district is the wall time, the amount of time that our units are spending offloading. We have seen call volume that has gone up, but the ability to get units back in service. We shared a letter that basically Metro put together along with the other departments. It got the attention, and we had a meeting with area CEOs. We had the LIMSA that was there along with the county medical director, some county staff, and then the fire chiefs. We pushed back very hard on the system. And during the meeting, there was a lot of talk about understanding the problem, and everybody agreed that there was a problem, but there really was nothing for being able to move forward. We talked about some violations that had happened and that we were basically turning those violations into the pay. We talked a lot about the poor support that we feel we're getting from the LIMSA. And actually had last Wednesday had an individual die on one of our gurneys at one of our local hospitals, and went through and started to get some movement forward. It was disappointing from the LIMSA that when we talked about some options of treat and release, or I shouldn't say that, treat and refer, and then treat and transport to alternative destinations. They tried to compare and say, well, it's really because of the fires that are going on that is causing this problem, of which we were able to basically squash. And then the other one was that it would take us months to be able to go through this and figure these things out, even though there was a plan that was started really in January. And then tried to tell us that it was worse in January than it is now, and that it is going to flatten out and go away. So I will say that the meeting was not a very popular meeting, but it was very into the details of wanting to move forward. And it has been a very busy day-to-day following up. And we will have a meeting next Thursday of all the CEOs along with the LIMSA again. So we'll see what happens. One of the other meetings that we had was a meeting with the membership. And Director Sailors was there with us. We had basically the room here filled up with a number of people. We gave an update on Station 41 and Station 53, in which the second bathrooms and showers have been completed. Our next project at Station 21, there was some concern about the amount of money that had been spent on those stations, and it was exaggerated. We were able to look at Station 41 and 53 because we have really our own staff and their chief Wagman staff that are here that were able to do the work. So they were about $3,000 to $5,000 each, and we did everything internally. So they were not hundreds of thousands of dollars that were spent on those. But at the end of the day, the facilities that are there today are just what I would say additional showers, bathrooms to meet the needs and the diversity of our district. We're moving forward with it. The same thing with 21. I know that there's some projects that we just have to be able to get done. So we'll start probably in about a month at Station 21. And again, it'll be the same. Probably our biggest challenge is over at Station 23. It is just old and trying to figure out what's the best options. And some of that may actually be where we really go through and remodel the station and stuff. But we have been committed to doing that and moving forward. So we got a lot of good feedback from that. One of the other things that was talked about was the catastrophic leave policy. And there was a lot of discussions over the last year about just the name of it. And so in discussions, we came up with a donated leave policy. Truly the policy itself will stay the same, but the name will change to a donated leave. We have probably about 5 different policies that are at 522 now for review. Once they go through a review, we'll bring it back to the board. But it was definitely something that was emotional as far as the name, and so making a change, I think, was really positive for that, for being able to move forward. We also talked about things that we wanted to be able to cover and kind of focus on over the next 2 years. And one of those things that are there, we talked a lot about our culture. We talked a lot about promotions, the recruitment of a diverse population, and what are some of the things that we can do. And then officer supervisor training support. And I thought one of the things that was a really good conversation when we talked about the work and the culture, there were some conversations about training, and one of the ones was, well, we'll put some stuff online to be able to do online training. To me, I don't think that changes an organization. Is that I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the best, that when I go to online training, I figure out what I need to do at the end of it to get it accomplished and go through it. And I don't know if it really, I hate to admit it, but sometimes it probably isn't a learning more than it's a checkbox of going through. But some of the things that came out that I thought was great was using a system like a green sheet, which is when something bad happens on the fire ground, it's shared with everybody, it's discussed. And while we won't pick individual events that are here, but there's more than enough events that we can talk about. And talking about interactions in a fire station or culture or growing. There's websites that are online that will have different things. And using those things as training tools and using those to bring awareness that can be done at a company level, that can be done at a battalion level, that can be done in academies, captains academies, but a way to bring awareness and then to bring expectations on what is the right way for moving forward. The other part about it was on there that we talked a lot about was recruitment. And one of the things that I had said was that I feel we have part-time recruitment. And what I meant by that was usually it's somebody that's assigned to the field, and then it's their part-time job on their days off or when they have some extra time. And so we committed to moving forward October 1st. Firefighter White will be coming to staff, and we will work on putting on a plan together and figuring out what that looks like as we move forward with him in a temporary position for a little while. So I think it was a very positive meeting. At the end of it, I asked the group, do we continue to meet? Do we want to move forward? And I think probably 99% of the people said, yes, let's continue to meet and work on what we have started here. The last item before I turn it over to Chief Mitchell is an event that happens each year. It's called the EMS Memorial Bike Ride. And it's across the United States, and here locally, they would normally have rode from South Lake Tahoe down to Rancho Cordova to the capital and then out to San Francisco. On the 23rd, though, they're going to start here, obviously because of the fire, start here in Rancho Cordova, and then ride down to the state capitol. They'll have a small event there, and then they'll ride, probably I think over the next day, they ride all the way down to San Francisco, and they'll have another event. They're raising money for an EMS memorial. We have been involved with it over the years in supporting it. This year, one of our retired captains, Matt McGrew, is riding in it. And he is riding in the name of Kyle, who passed away last year. And with the funding, Chief Law, who is obviously connected with Matt McGrew, is matching up to $5,000 that goes to Kyle's family directly. And so we're going to support Chief Law in that and be able to move forward. Their goal is to raise $20,000 on this West Coast ride. And Chief Law, as I said, is going to match up to $5,000 of that and give that directly to Kyle or to Kyle's family. That ends my report unless you have any questions for me. I will have Chief Mitchell with the ops report.
Thanks, Chief Arms. Dean Kelly, Board of Directors, Adam Mitchell, Deputy Chief Operations, with tonight's ops report. I'm gonna start off with removing this. Hopefully, I don't have any chips in my teeth. A CERT update. That program has been doing very well, and I think it's important to recognize their commitment to our organization and what they've done and have been doing recently in response to some of our incidents. The first one is we've had 9 members that responded up to the cow door incident and provided 55 staff hours between August 29th and September 5th, and they're staffing a call center as well as large animal evacuation facilities up there, and doing just a phenomenal job representing our organization, but you know, volunteering their time to be in there. So that's a really big positive for them. And they continue to volunteer. I know Chief Arikas here and converses with them often, and they've been a very valuable piece of the organization and representing us up there. And then the second item that they participated in recently on Friday, August 28th, we had a fire down in the Battalion 9's area. CERT responded to that incident. It's not typical for us to have a long duration event of multiple hours, and that incident specifically involved a lot of homes and a large area. And so we went through Chief Arikas and we activated the CERT members, and they came down and they set up in the area for rehab for our firefighters, as well as some of the victims of the fire, to be able to provide them waters, shade, chairs, things like that. So they showed up, jumped right in there, and did a phenomenal job to help stand up our logistics folks and our reserve firefighters as well. So that was a very big positive. Wanted to pass that on to you. A second item is just an update on what we have going on out on the Office of Emergency Service Response. We continue to have 2 engines up on the cow door incident on 2 different strike teams or task forces. We just rotated, we are rotating tomorrow. I believe it's our 4th 2-week rotation on our Type 3 OES engine, 8433. And we'll send up 4 new crew members. Those crew members have been up there for the last 2 weeks. They'll come home. We'll send 4 new ones up there, and they'll continue to work through the busy fire season that we have. The other strike team that's up there during the time where the fire came across the crest and started going into South Lake Tahoe, the incident reached out as a critical need, and with in the region, we rallied together and we were able to get another company out of our districts to respond up their immediate need. Went right into the Christmas Valley area that night and provided structure protection. And happy to report that that evening when they were there as one of the strike teams early on, had just 1 outbuilding loss and 1 exterior fire they extinguished with no homes lost in that area. So those folks are still up there working as well. Good news there. We also have a couple of support personnel, a couple of our mechanics. They were at drawdown, and based off of the duration of the incidents that have been going on, there's a need to support the fleet. And so 2 of our mechanics that are carded to provide general mechanic services, Ship Purcell was able to push those folks up there too, and they're still there. So that one just keeps on going, and our folks are there helping out. Second, an incident happened up here in Placer County near Forest Hill, the American River confluence below the bridge. It was the bridge incident that started back on Sunday, September 5th. During that time, based off of, again, the resource drawdown, they reached out to us and said, we need some help. Can you send some engines from Sacramento? So we were able to form up quickly right out of the fire stations an initial attack strike team. Metro Fire responded 3 of our Type 3 engines and an on-duty battalion chief, and brought in another off-duty battalion chief as a strike team leader, along with an engine from Folsom and an engine from Sacramento Fire. And they drove lights and sirens up the hill and engaged in that incident. Happy to report. And our copter also was dispatched up there. Happy to report that they were able to get around that very quickly. And I believe it was 400 and some odd acres that they were able to contain that fire. Based off the complexity, and again, resource drawdown. The unit also requested response from the Sacramento Regional Incident Management Team. So they responded up there, engaged, and helped them build the plan and support logistically. So our members continue to be very active through fire season, both here in our own district with vegetation fires, but also in our surrounding communities. And when our time of need, I'm very comfortable that based off our support that we've been giving, those folks would come help us when we make that call. So next item is ambulance drawdown. Chief Harms mentioned the challenges we've seen with ambulance patient offload time, APOT or wall time. Unfortunately, that creates a challenge for us in operations. And we have pretty much been managing ambulance drawdown challenges daily at this point. We've been getting the system drawdown levels to critical, I would call. Also, we get to a 0 ambulance status in the system in a county of our size. That's a big problem for us. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, we got right there. We got right to 0. We reached out. Some folks made some great decisions that day. I will say I'm very proud of this organization, and our chief officer staff, as well as our line personnel, made some decisions that had never been made before. And we were able to make sure that there was not a call for service that did not get an ambulance responded based off of some very creative ways of bringing some additional resources into the system that we hadn't gone into before. So with call volume being up, that is a factor, but I think it's for us as a district, we have, and Chief Harms mentioned some of the criteria we're using to go after fixing that. We can't just keep treating the symptom. We can't put more ambulances out there. We can't just keep hiring people. We can't continue just to treat that. We have to go on a longer term approach on fixing it. And so to work on that, we're committed to meeting with our partners. We have been. We're working with the LEMSA to be able to streamline it and really write our plan down of how to deal with it, but also long-term how to fix it. That's probably our most, there's many things that we're dealing with, but that's probably our most critical need right now to try to figure out how to make that work. So, and then finally, just some statistics. We've had 5,175 calls since our last report, or just about 370 calls a day, so still very busy out there. We've had 20 building fires that our crews have responded to. 8 have been ours. One of those being that 4-alarm fire that we had down in South Sacramento back on the 28th. It included the fatality, and I don't know the final number. I know it was about a dozen-ish mobile homes and a number of single-family residences as well. That was a big incident for us. But we also had just yesterday morning on the 8th, we had 4 significant incidents in the county in the early morning hours, so between midnight and 6 a.m. We had the fire that was, you probably saw covered on the news on Roseville Road that was underneath the bridge, the homeless encampment. We had a multi-unit mobile home fire that was over on Auburn. We had 2 multi-alarm grass fires down the American River Parkway west of Watt Avenue. It was a very busy night for B Shift. We ended up taking command of 2 of those incidents with our chief officers due to the drawdown. We, over that time, also committed 19 of our units. And so those folks worked really hard. I actually got a phone call the next day from Sacramento Fire Department's assistant chief who was covering and said, I just wanted to reach out and say thank you. Your crews were phenomenal. There wasn't one complaint. They came in, they really worked hard, and they really helped us out. And I don't think I mentioned this, but all 4 of those incidents were in Sacramento Fire Department's jurisdiction. So they were all automatic gate incidents that were responded to over that night. So our crews really stepped up and did a great job. And then actually, just to mention this, because it's different this time, our busiest engine company was Engine 109 over the last 2 weeks with 202 responses, and our busiest ambulance was Medic 105 with 223 responses. That's it for the operations report, unless there's any questions.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a question. Any determination on the cause of the fires along the Roseville Road and Auburn Boulevard? Is it cause of arson or anything like that? Do we know that?
So, Director, that those are under investigation still, and those are Sacramento Fire Department's jurisdiction. However, I will say that specifically, I did have a conversation with their chiefs over there about the Parkway fires, the 2 multi-alarm Parkway fires, and those are both very suspicious, and they are moving forward with potentially having identified a suspect and trying to figure out how to mitigate that and make contact with that suspect as of yesterday when I was on the phone with them.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Deputy Chief Mitchell's report? Well, thank you, sir. Moving on, we have Sac Metro Fire Firefighters Local 522 report. Is Mr. McGoldrick with us?
No, I don't believe.
No? Okay. I didn't see him online either. All right, moving on to committee and delegate reports. Executive Committee, we have nothing to report. Communications Center JPA, Deputy Chief Wagaman.
No report tonight, President Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. The California Fire Rescue Training JPA, Chief Harms.
Report.
All right, moving on to the Finance and Audit Committee. Did anybody attend that meeting this evening? Report out for Director Orzali? No. No report. Okay, moving on to Policy Committee. Director Gould left our meeting about 6:55, I think. He sent me a message that he needed to depart. So no report there. How about board members' questions and comments? Director White?
Thank you, President Kelly. Just a few comments. I want to thank Ken Campo for the strong work that he has done regarding this year's final budget. Also, Erin Castleberry for her work on the grants, and Shay Purcell and his whole team for keeping our fleet in service. I actually demoed from the Caldor fire today, and it was very comforting to me to see AFPD mechanics were the ones that were ensuring that the vehicles were safe to return to their home agency. So thank you. And then, of course, to all the members who have been stepping up during this very active fire season and working tirelessly and many additional hours. And I want to commend the command staff and those that are working diligently to try and improve the APOT situation. As we know, the arrival to patient offloading time has just been increasing, and it's becoming a compounding problem. And it's got a lot of it's creating ripple effects that are detrimental to the organization. So I'm glad to see that there is a focused effort on really trying to achieve a better outcome. So thank you.
Thank you, Director White. Director Sheets.
Good evening. I wanted to take this time to thank our last board meeting speaker, Mr. Warren, for his comments. After the meeting, I've had some time to reflect on my thoughts and how to respond. And I wanted to write it down because I didn't want to forget anything. I'm absolutely appalled and embarrassed that a member of our community felt it was safer to privately transport his ill wife to the hospital rather than allow our first responders to care for her. He expressed his fear of allowing potentially unvaccinated personnel to care for her outweighed any benefit and could potentially put her in grave danger. I find this unacceptable. I've been a registered nurse for over 20 years. I trust science and I trust the recommendations of our physician leaders. This is who we go to for care when we're sick. Our hospitals are at capacity and there's no end in sight. This current surge is preventable, and it's shocking and irresponsible that healthcare providers are not advocating this truth. Vaccines work. Just like our first responders are tired, our hospital staff are exhausted. It is like Groundhog Day, and I'm terrified what this is doing to our healthcare professionals and their mental health. Hospital capacity is at our winter peak surge, and we're just entering flu season. It's unbelievable to me that people in our community don't trust the science, but they do once they're sick and are overwhelmingly the unvaccinated population. This has placed our healthcare system near its breaking point. Elective surgeries have been postponed. Our ERs are significantly impacted. Our inpatient side must make hard and unimaginable decisions on restricting visitors and loved ones from visiting their family members when they're dying or those who are seeking medical treatment. Preventing best friends from visiting their colleague who has received cancer treatment or experienced a stroke. It is unacceptable and it is heartbreaking. Wear a mask, wash your hands. For those of you who are eligible, please get vaccinated so we can be done with this nightmare. And please, above all, be safe. That's all.
Thank you for that, Director Sheets. Director Wood.
I couldn't say it any more eloquently than Director Sheets has, so I'll leave that at that.
Thank you. Director Gould has left us. Director Clark.
All I can say is, Director Sheets, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank her for those words that she expressed. I concur with those sentiments.
Thank you. Director Sailors.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to take this off so you can hear me better. I too concur with what Director Sheets just said. I too would like to see this nightmare end. But I also would like to thank everyone for their presentations tonight. I also would like to thank Chief Larms for speaking about the meeting with the brave men and women that came and had the serious, difficult conversations about how to change the culture of this fire district. It's difficult conversations like that that help these crazy times get better for everyone. I'm also looking forward to Tim White's new position starting on October 1st. And I'm looking forward to his first presentation to us. And I'm looking forward to seeing him at the regional diversity meeting whenever we have the next one. I know it's coming up at the end of this month. So please, everyone out there, please stay safe, get vaccinated. Please help us end this nightmare. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Director White, Director Sheets, Director Sailors, thank you for saying it all. I appreciate the input of all directors this evening, the staff reports. Chief, thank you for doing the job you do, and welcome, Mr. O'Toole. All right then, John Labra, I'd be remiss in not thanking you for your help on our issues this evening. And Board Clerk, Michelle Dehoney, you're doing a fabulous job. Thank you. If I missed anybody, I apologize. I hope everybody has a great evening and a good weekend coming up. Thank you. This would adjourn the board meeting for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District on September 9th. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.